Good morning. It is 11:14 a.m. on Sunday, January 8th, 2017. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. And today, this is the Avatar The Last Airbender rewatch for Season 1, Episode 20, The Siege of the North, Part 2. Finale for Season 1, and holy crap, what a great episode, right? Am I right? Of course I am. Yeah. Anyway, I actually talked a little bit about this episode yesterday's video, just in the sense of recognizing that although I certainly enjoy season 1, have enjoyed the journey to get here, when I think about the series as a whole, a lot of my favorite stuff doesn't actually get introduced in season 1 until, it doesn't get introduced till later. My video camera's crooked a little bit. And just recognizing that some of the most epic things that I remember, biggest character moments, come later in the story, because one of the strengths of this show is how it's able to just build on itself and build and build and build. The continuity is so critical for it. Even though generally speaking, most episodes, you could just jump right in to most episodes and be fine. But there's just so much history and storytelling built up that it just makes the show amazing. So we finished last time on a cliffhanger where Zuko had infiltrated the North Pole city and kidnapped Aang, who's currently meditating right out from under Katara's grasp, and had wandered off with him. Meanwhile, we have Admiral Zhao with Iroh at his side, forcing his way into the city. And so we get a lot of really cool action with the Fire Nation Navy penetrating further and further into the city. And in particular, the waterbending master, who, there was a period where we didn't like him because, he was being mean to Katara and Aang. But then, even though I commented in episode 18 how his reformation felt a little easy, nonetheless, whether we liked him before or not, just seeing him be just a total waterbending badass here, fighting the Fire Nation army is pretty great. But the show does a great job with this action sequence of saying, even though they've got a lot of really talented waterbenders here who are just awesome, the Fire Nation's combination of numbers and technology, they just can't be withstood. But it's, again, this great push and pull, this idea of the firebenders are stronger during the day and then the waterbenders are stronger at night. So Iroh is saying, sure, we're doing good because it's during the day, but as soon as the full moon rises, they're going to be unstoppable again. But turns out Admiral Zhao has a sinister plan. And it's interesting because, there's been, over the course of this season, not really all that much interaction with the spirit world, and certainly I think a lot of my favorite parts tend to involve the spirit world and that sort of thing. So I think that's super cool. So Aang's journey in the spirit world, I think that's some of the best stuff in this show, honestly. And it's why, as a semi-unrelated note, all the spirit world stuff is also pretty good in Legend of Korra. But so Aang, needing to find out how to contact the spirits of the moon and the ocean, has delved into the spirit world. And there's a lot of just fun weirdness of just like this weird meditating monkey who just seems irritated, um, and gives Aang just a little will-o'-the-wisp to follow for a little while just to go away. And it's funny just because it's like it's interesting and weird, but it really doesn't connect to anything necessarily. It's just part of giving the impression that the spirit world is populated. It's not that there are things that live there and do their own thing there, and that's kind of cool. And so having Aang, walking through this like lush forested swamp, and just things like the branch just dissolving right from under him, and we are reminded that he can't use his bending in the spirit world. And he has just a few, little misadventures. He's not making it very far on his own until Avatar Roku, one of his prior incarnations, shows up to, kind of tell him what's what, or at least tell him where he needs to go. And thus we get the encounter with the Face Stealer, which is just how cool and creepy is that? It was this amazing design of this really awful, scary looking giant bug thing, but with human faces, and this idea that if you show even this tiniest bit of emotion, it can steal your face. And that's way cool. And during that encounter, also the idea of learning that it had in fact successfully done that to a previous avatar is a great way to give the encounter stakes, in the sense of thinking, well, it's not a guarantee that Aang's going to succeed here, or at the very least, if he does, it will have been a difficult task, not an easy one. And sure enough, with all the various tricks that this thing tries to do to try to get Aang, it's trying to variously make him angry, scared, mad, sad, and with all its tricks, it seems like that would be really hard to withstand, but Aang manages it by and large because he needs to, I guess. I mean, we're not really given a lot of setup for why he's suddenly that able to control his emotions. It's not really something Aang tends to be great at in general, but it's fine. I think that's nitpicky. But to learn that the moon and ocean spirits have taken mortal forms in order to help the humans, which is, of course, what happens to, like the idea of them taking that job in order to help the water tribe, and, make waterbending powerful is interesting. And, it's not full, it's one of those great spirit type stories where things kind of have an emotional logic, if not a concrete, factual, understandable logic. And so you don't really understand how, but why is a vaguely good enough explanation, and therefore the story has that great otherworldly quality to it. And the idea, though, that there are other places where that knowledge might exist. Aang has to get it from the Face Stealer, but we learn that Admiral Zhao has also learned that this occurred, and he plans to go down in history not just as the admiral who sacks the North Pole, but also who steals the moon. But of course, Iroh, as soon as he is aware of that plan, is immediately not on board. Is all of a sudden he is horrified, and any pretense of supporting Zhao is completely out the window now. And that's kind of cool because, we've liked Iroh over the course of the season. It's like sometimes, Zuko would be frustrated with him for being seemingly lazy or cowardly or whatever. But, there's always a wisdom to him, always a humor. And so when we see him legitimately pissed off, it's kind of exhilarating just because he's so cool. And yet he's kind of been outmaneuvered because Zhao gets into a position where he's able to kill the moon spirit in the form of the koi fish. And all of a sudden, waterbending just, it's gone. And that's so, it's so creepy, the idea, because it's one of those things where one of the things that the show is great at, I think, is building this world of establishing different rules for how the bending works and everything, but having it still be magical too. And the idea of being able to kill a fish and the moon goes away and that stops one of the elemental forms of magic, and that can be done by just a guy who just knows to go there. Like that's cool stuff, I think. But of course, Iroh is infuriated. Zhao escapes, and meanwhile, Aang has managed to leave the Face Stealer with the information, and turns out that his body being moved while he's spirit walking doesn't seem like it's really that big a deal because he's able to just kind of find it again. And not only that, but the sort of streak of light allows Katara and Sokka and Princess Yue on Appa to find him too. Yeah, no, it works out. And so we have Zuko, who we hear him while Aang is out, he's reflecting on how certain people like Zhao have always had it easy, and how he's always had to struggle, but he's kind of glad of it because he feels like it's made him strong and made him who he is. And we have him mention his sister. And we get another bit of his sister at the end, which I'll talk about later. But the idea that his sister was always better than him at everything and everyone likes her better and that sort of thing. And so Zuko is in a very vulnerable place here because he's succeeded to some extent, but he didn't really have an exit strategy. And so that's why, it's interesting because when we finally have Katara and Sokka and Princess Yue find Aang, and Zuko is knocked unconscious in the snow, Katara gets to have a little bit of retribution for Zuko beating her before. Aang says, no, we have to bring him. We can't let him die. And there's a growing respect and compassion there, even if they still have ultimately very different primary motives. But to bring him back. And so that leads to this scenario where Aang and the others discover what has happened to the moon spirit. And so we have a number of things happening at once. We have Aang going into the Avatar state and kind of embodying the vengeful ocean spirit, who now deprived of the moon spirit is, and is able to just become incredibly powerful and just push back the Fire Nation Navy, just push them back. And we also get the final confrontation between Zuko and Zhao, where it's like they're talking, but there's kind of nothing to be said at that point. It's just kind of, we've revealed that that Zhao, in being like he was competent in achieving what he sort of set out to do, but he set out to break the world essentially without realizing that it was that serious. And it's this terrible thing that he's done. And he kind of recognizes, he's recognizing now as he leaves the city and he's seeing this moon spirit, or the ocean spirit, so powerful, and he's just had to fight off and barely escape from Iroh. And it's starting, I think, to add up to him that it's not going the way he envisioned. And then to have this confrontation with Zuko, where they don't actually fight to a conclusion, because the ocean spirit shows up and basically decides to take Admiral Zhao, down to the ocean, presumably to be drowned. And Zuko, despite having just been fighting with Zhao, does offer a hand, let me help you. And Zhao's last moment is essentially deciding to refuse the offered help of Zuko. Basically, I would rather die than let you help me. And it's a fitting end to Zhao, indeed. And so now we have a terrible choice. We have the dilemma of the moon spirit is dead. What can we do? And then we had gotten Princess Yue's story about having been sickly as an infant and being saved by the moon spirit. The idea that it had given her some of its life, and now she is prepared to give it back in order to restore the moon. And it's one of those things where everything had been set up just so well to have us understand what this will mean, and having come to like her and to understand more of the talk of destiny, like even just the idea that she was betrothed, it always felt like it was more than that. And even if she didn't know exactly what was going to need to happen, the idea, though, that she's going to give up her life to bring back the moon, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's one of those things where we certainly understand the need to bring back the moon, and it seems horribly unfair that she should have to do this, and yet we totally understand her sacrifice, and no one really even tries to talk her out of it. But, just the heartbreak for Sokka, and for her to, give him one last kiss as she essentially becomes the moon. Sokka does not have good luck with girlfriends so far. It's actually become kind of a, mini meme of Sokka's girlfriend became the moon. But yeah, so it's just this heartbreaking moment, and we really feel for Sokka in that moment, and for Yue in the sense of there's no bitterness or complaint about it being unfair that she has to do this. It's more just a determined resolution of, it has to be done. I'm the one that can do it, so here I go. And it's great. It's great storytelling. And so she gives up her life in order to restore the moon, and it is restored. And, that is sort of the last thing that Zhao sees before he is taken, is recognition that his whole plan has now failed, and he basically, accomplished nothing. And I think that's part of what feeds into his decision, too. And so we have a really kind of heartbreaking but victorious resolution to this whole siege The Fire Nation is pushed back. Zhao is eliminated. And we have Zuko and Iroh now leaving the North Pole without trying to retake Aang. And Iroh even questions Zuko on that. And it's a great question because it's essentially just a situation of, is this even really still your plan? Is this just a temporary truce? What's going on exactly, Zuko? And Zuko expresses it as just being tired, and no doubt he is physically. But we get the impression, too, that his growing respect for Aang is making a journey to capture him morally and spiritually tiring as well. It's more than just a quest now, it's a burden. And I think we get the impression that he's rethinking it. And Iroh is determined to stand by his side and hoping to coach him through the journey he's on. And so it's good stuff. It's good stuff. And so that's where we leave, Zuko and Iroh. We leave Aang and Katara and Sokka with the idea that now the Northern Water Tribe is going to send some people, including the Waterbending Master, down to the South Pole to try to say, that the two tribes have been separate for too long and they should help one another. And that's good. We can support that. But there's this element of, but how Aang still hasn't mastered waterbending, and the idea that Katara is talented enough that she can be his master. And that's nice to hear. It feels good to hear that. And to have Katara's talents finally respected at that level. And then, of course, at the very end, we get a stinger where we zoom all the way to the Fire Nation and see the Fire Lord Ozai, Zuko's father, talking about Admiral Zhao being a failure and Iroh being a traitor and Zuko, an exile. So someone still has to capture the Avatar, and so he's going to send Zuko's sister, who is still not actually even named here, but all we see is just her face. And, people could be forgiven for not remembering all the way back to the previous episode, but certainly when we saw the flashback of Zuko doing the Agni Kai fire duel with his father, when we watched and saw the crowd was full of horrified stares and one young woman who looked totally into it, it's her again, Zuko's sister, the one who is born lucky, who's the best at at firebending, and everybody likes her. It's Azula, and boy, she is amazing. She's an amazing character, and she is definitely one of the more memorable bits of the series to me. And without spoiling why that is, but now she finally shows up into the into the series, and so it's an amazing wrap up to an amazing season. But part of what's got me excited is just recognizing how the story, as it now moves into season 2, is getting ready to introduce some of my actual favorite bits of the whole story. So, anyway, so I think that'll do it for this time. Thank you, everybody. And I will be back next week to talk about episode 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, season 2. Talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes.